All right, pull out your word of the day. We are starting in 5 seconds. One. All right. Our word today is analyze, which is a word I think that we think we know what it means, but maybe not to be rude, but just from reading our analysis papers, we need to revisit to figure out what it means, right? So for those Frederick Douglass analysis papers, I really hate Canvas as a grading mechanism. It doesn't work very well. So I printed them this time because I had a lot to say. So if you I have already gotten yours back, you turned it in, and I graded yours first because you printed it for me. That's great. If you turned it in digitally, I printed it and it's over there in your folder. So why don't you guys go take a second and go grab them out of your folders. Oh, but Elsa, yours was a little late. So I have to go. No, it will be. That's what I did? Oh, because it's a citation. That's not offensive. That's just a citation. That's sad. I'll find it. It might just be.
Wait, Claire.
Yes, I know.
She had a lot to say about life. I looks pretty chill, and then she goes off. Oh wow.
We do.
Thesis.
We didn't have it. Okay.
This is something that I did.
Read the comments.
Oh, really? So, wait, how many fingers are there? Wait, check your ears, make sure they're real. And read.
Oh, really? I messed up on my clothes. How could you remember?
Why do you think I
Oh my gosh.
do it contact?
Yeah, that's it.
Yay!
Okay, let me get your attention. So on these essays, if you didn't score as high as you wanted to score, I felt like these are great for the first rhetorical analysis, but it's your first rhetorical analysis, so they might not be the highest score. They might not be as high as you want them to be. That is usually, as I was reading them, there are a couple where we need to work on grammar, we need to work on just like mechanics of a paper and structure and so on. But for the most part, it was because the analysis was incomplete. There didn't seem to be much analysis going on, and instead it was a lot of summary. And so let's talk about what analysis is as a word of the day. So to analyze is to discover or reveal something through detailed examination. To discover or reveal something through detailed examination. And write this down too. If it fits in the definition, awesome, or write it under effects. It doesn't really matter, but it is when you take evidence, taking evidence, you contextualize it, textualizing it according to your argument. And you explain how that evidence applies to your argument. Okay, so in everyone's thesis statement, and I did feel like the thesis statements were really strong. In everyone's thesis statement, you had Frederick Douglass's argument plus the rhetorical strategies that Frederick Douglass uses to create that argument. So if you put that together, your argument for the rhetorical analysis is Frederick Douglass uses these things to be persuasive about this argument. So every time you were using a direct quotation and saying, look, he says this here, you need to prove to me how Frederick Douglass uses some kind of strategy in order to be persuasive. And so I think a lot of people were looking at the quotation and they were saying, here's what this quotation means. I'm going to summarize or paraphrase this quotation in my own words. But they weren't yet telling me, okay, now why is that quotation persuasive? Break that quotation down for me and give me a few insights into the words, right? When I said that to analyze is to discover or reveal something, you're kind of assuming that your audience is like, just slightly more educated than you. I think that's a good way to look at your audience. They've read the book and they understood what it meant, but your job as the writer is to kind of like illuminate something for them about the book and the language in the book that they maybe hadn't thought of before. So if you just summarize, it's kind of looking at it and saying, oh, reader, you must not have understood what this meant. Let me tell you what it meant. But kind of assume they know what it means. And instead you are trying to tell them how it is persuasive. All right, so I'm going to give you, for our examples for our word of the day, I'm going to give you some examples from really good paragraphs. I think a couple of these are from this class. So if it's yours, you can reveal or not. They're anonymous. Okay, does everyone have one? Raise your hand if you got it. All right. I think this first one does a really good job showing us how to analyze a metaphor. So I'm going to read this first one to you. They might have spelled slavery wrong, but I might have spelled slavery wrong when I translate. So let's not hold any spelling errors against anyone. All right. Metaphors are also used to show the negative change that came over slaveholders. Douglass describes how slavery changed Mrs. Old for the worst, saying, the fatal poison of irresponsible power was already in her hands and soon commenced its infernal work. By using this metaphor, Douglass provides a more vivid image of the slow corruption of a slaveholder. Okay, now that part right there, that by using this metaphor, Douglass provides a more vivid image of the slow corruption of a slaveholder. We get a little bit of argumentation in there when they say vivid image, not much. And most of that sentence is just, let me restate what this means. Corruption of a slaveholder, that's the argument that he's getting at, right? The rest of this paragraph is analysis. So do you see, I wanted to point that out to you just so you see like how much of the paragraph is dedicated to like picking apart the sentence and telling us what it means. So it says, by using the metaphor of poison as slavery, Douglass shows that this change doesn't happen overnight, that the slow building of prejudice and the thirst for power inside the heart of a slaveholder rots them from the inside out, just like poison. Using poison as a metaphoric term for slavery also tells the reader that slaveholders allow themselves to become cruel. Poison isn't like a knife or gun. No one else actually does the thing that kills you. When you ingest poison, you die from inside out factors. First, it corrupts the inside, which will later impact your exterior. Similarly, slaveholders become morally and spiritually corrupted because they allow themselves to be cruel to their slaves. They allow themselves to adopt the prejudice of other slaveholders, and they allow themselves to think of slaves as inferior to themselves. Also, we should just point out how great the parallelism is in that sentence. Isn't that nicely put? Yeah. Ultimately, by using this metaphor, Douglas shows that slavery slowly corrupts slaveholders and that slaveholders allow themselves to change for the worst. Okay, someone tell me why this is what the writer is doing here is analyzing the sentence rather than just summarizing the sentence. How is this writer analyzing the quotation? What's the difference between analysis then and what could be summary?
Yeah, just really focusing more on like this specific sentence, not all of it talked about, and like obviously the rhetoric that's being talked about comparatively to like if you're talking about the story in general or a bigger chunk of
Okay, good. So I think a different paragraph, a weaker paragraph might have said, here's who Sophia Old was, here's how she treated Frederick Douglass, here were the results of that, kind of summarizing the story, right? But what Josie's saying is that the whole paragraph, I think it was her, I can't remember, is focused so closely on this one sentence, and particularly this one phrase in the one sentence. I mean, this paragraph could have gone on and talked about infernal and irresponsible and so on, but look how much they were able to say just about poison, and that's it. Yeah, Kaylee. Yeah.
Is that instead of focusing on like parties, we're gonna how they're doing that through their word choice?
Yes. Yes, exactly. So it's like you keep asking yourself, how does it do this? This is what his argument comes to. And we did those summaries so that you could see like just how specific you can be about an argument, right? But now we're thinking about how does the argument then become persuasive? Like how is he convincing us of this argument? Yeah, Elsa.
Something I just found those really powerful about this was it made me think about like two words specifically.
Yeah.
And they took so much like outside information and brought that in. So it's not just using the book. It's like, this is what poison does and how it works. And that's how it's persuasive. Because you don't always think the fate of poison is irresponsible. So it's like, you just read that and you're like, oh yeah, poison, it will kill you. But they're like saying, they're going beyond that.
Yeah. Let me tell you a little bit about poison and how it kills you and what's interesting about the way he used it. Yeah. And that's where when we look at what analyzing is, it's like revealing something about the text. What's the word I used? Yeah. Discovering or revealing something. It's like your reader didn't necessarily bring all of this information about poison to their own reading, and you're giving them this new information so that they'll be interested when they read your analysis. Yeah.
I also just love where they made the analogy that was like self-administered in a way, because it's like it's not something that happens to you. You slowly build on it and make yourself worse.
Yes, and I thought that was really clever. And it's maybe not something that Douglas thought about. That's another important thing here. Maybe it wasn't intentioned by Douglas that he was thinking about how poison's self-administered, that you're poisoning yourself. But the use of the term kind of lends itself to that reading, and that's what the reader is bringing to the analysis. That makes sense. Okay, let's look at the next one. A little bit different. The idea that the racism which encompasses slavery is a top behavior and is not inherent to a person's nature continues to be detailed into chapter 7. Here, Douglas describes a childhood interaction between himself and some white children, stating, I used to talk this matter of slavery over with them. I would sometimes say to them, I wished I could be as free as they would be when they got to be men. You will be free as soon as you are 21, but I am slave for life. Have not I as good a right to be free as you have? These words used to trouble them. They would express for me the liveliest sympathy. In this excerpt, the author juxtaposes the situation of these children to the situation he is currently in, as well as the mentality of those who have long been corrupted by racism. The first comparison between Frederick and the white children serves to evaluate the differences between their circumstances. It is obvious that these children, at least to some extent, see Frederick as no different than themselves. The only difference in their mind is that he, until the age of 21, will be a slave. But the reason why they believe that he will be freed upon manhood is because the same is true for them. They will be allowed to leave their parents' home and make a life of their own upon that same age. This is of course false, and as Frederick Douglass stated himself, he is a slave for life. This interaction was also included by the children in order to act as a juxtaposition between youthful naivete of the white children compared to a corrupted slave owner such as Sophia Old. The primary difference outlined between these two demographics is the way in which they view Black people. While the children, as stated, see Frederick as someone akin to themselves, slave owners will, nearly all of the time, regard Black people as inhuman and inferior to themselves. The reason that Douglass chose to juxtapose these two groups was to evaluate their current differences and to give the reader a sense of dread that these children will eventually fall victim to the world in which they were born into, just the same as was so showcased with Sophia Old. All right, what I want you to do now is with the partner that you usually work with, I want you to talk about your favorite sentence in that paragraph and identify why it's your favorite sentence.
Oh my goodness. That's fair. What's your point?
I think I like I literally was interaction of sorry, I think you can use your I like the last sentence. Yeah. But I do know that Lexi gave her first one. Sorry. Sticking my chair. I like the last one. I know very scary. Wait, let's see. My slap mark is gone. The slap mark is gone.
All right, let's meet back. And we're gonna read this last one. I was a little bit afraid that you'd see the length of the first two and say, oh, but like, that's so much to say. Not that that really makes a difference, but I think psychologically that can be a bit daunting. The third paragraph here is pretty short, and yet they get to the analysis so quickly that it remains effective. Yeah.
So I remember you were talking about like breaking up your argument into multiple paragraphs. Like,
Yeah.
What do you think works better? Like on the AP test, do you want to have like a super long one or super?
It just depends if you're talking about if what you're talking about is complete, right? So I think this one works as a super long paragraph because if you look at the sentence right after the quotation, and it says the author juxtaposes the situation of these children to the situation he's currently in, as well as the mentality of those who have long been corrupted by racism. I would move it. I don't know that this paragraph is perfect. I would have moved that maybe to the first sentence. That's the sort of the topic sentence here. But that's a big idea, and they need this length of paragraph to fully cover that idea, you know? Whereas this next one has a smaller idea, and so it works to have a small paragraph, and you just kind of have to be able to see when you're switching topics and need to switch paragraphs. Yeah. Okay, let's look at this third one. The Hypophora illustrates the irony of the similarities between a slave master and slave in their conditions. Just so you know, the last paragraph this writer was talking about was also talking about Hypophora. So when Douglass answers his question and why, he says that it is solely because his master had the power to compel me to give it up. This ironic Hypophora explains that a slave master has a lot of power, yet still endures the same dehumanizing effects that slaves do. Their power to compel a slave to give up the money that they earn on their own causes the dehumanization of a slaveholder. They lose their identity as they turn into people who take away slaves' possessions, who steal the money they earn, and who treat a human being as a non-human because they aren't who they used to be. Being a slaveholder has mentally and physically caused them to change their view of human beings. Thus, through the Hypophora, Douglas conveys to his audience the irony in the fact that both slave and slaveholders experience the dehumanization of slavery. So it's shorter, but I really like here how the author is pointing out that phrase, power to compel, and thinking about how being either on the side of compelling or the side of being compelled could be a way of taking away someone's humanity. I think I could do a little bit more with this paragraph, but I think it shows how even short paragraphs can get to a lot of analysis. Okay, does that make sense? And does it make sense why these paragraphs are good? All right, there were lots of good paragraphs. I just picked these 3. Yes.
Sorry for the another question, but
Yeah.
in like ninth grade, we were taught to do quotes that are like 1 to 10 words, but once again, I don't know, like.
Oh, yeah, it's that's good advice. You want to use a quote. You only want to quote if you're going to actually look at the words in the quote. So you don't want it to be too long because you won't be able to analyze every single thing in that quotation the way that you want to. But you also want to give just a little bit of context too. So you don't want it to just be the couple words. So I think the one that's in the first paragraph, that size of quote, we're talking about fatal poison. I thought that was a good way to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, they shortened it. They didn't include the entire sentence, but they only focused on that part of it and its meaning.
I know we've actually talked about this before, but when you, in MLA formatting, when you write out a number as like a word, or when you just use the number?
Oh, so there's a big debate. I'm like getting excited. There's a big grammar debate.
I
about
feel like
this.
we talked about this last year, but I wanted to go over it.
I think, but this is not necessarily official. I think 10 and below, you need to spell it out.
Okay.
And then above that, you can write the word. But other people think, and they're arguing to make this official, that it should be 99 and below, that you should
What?
write it out.
I don't like that.
Um,
No, it should be 10. 10 below.
I like 10 or below, but yeah, they say that as soon as it gets into having to write 3 words, like 112 or whatever, then it's getting too long. Yeah, so I say 10 and below, but this does not count for citations, and I want you guys to look at the citation here. I didn't correct this on everyone's, but you were talking about Douglas throughout this whole paper. I didn't see anyone else that was quoting anyone but Frederick Douglass. Oh, there was one person who was quoting Lloyd. Yeah, one of the prefaces.
We can't.
But it's still in Frederick Douglass, right? So if your whole paper is about one person and you've said his name over and over again, you don't need to write his name in the citation. All you need is the number.
Yeah.
Um,
I was getting
it felt
so
weird to write Douglas.
You only
like
use,
every
yeah,
single
you only
time.
use the name if it's like your reader is not gonna know which book you're talking about.
Do we need to do any form of like a work study page?
No, not for rhetorical analysis, especially not when our class is all reading the exact same version.
Well, for me, I like had the quotes, but then I like wrote them somewhere else. I forgot what page they're on, so like I just wrote his name because I didn't remember what page I found
Just
them on.
go into a PDF. and look at it.
Yeah, you
But
can
that
find
was
it as
the-
PDF.
I feel like that was the second best.
Okay.
One
Yeah.
more thing. So like in the second paragraph, they have a quote inside of a quote, like they're quoting what he says.
They did that
Do you
wrong.
do the just the one?
Yeah, you do the, yeah, so
Yeah.
you will be free, right, starting right there, it would be the one quotation.
Okay.
Yeah,
Just making sure.
yeah. Any more questions?
Grammar's my favorite part. Of these charts, I'm sorry.
Keep this in your minder. I think it's a good reminder of what we can achieve. And then we're pulling out our Ta-Nehisi codes. I will check your annotations today in a little bit.
Oh, that's good.
Wait,
I
that's
opened
the-
it to like past page 39 and I was like, wait, I didn't write any annotations.
It was the. That's scary because I was like, I thought.
Okay.
I was
Finishing out between Willoughby. Yeah. I'm gonna just catch us up really quick about where we were right at the end of class. Ta-Nehisi Coates feels like there are 4 American myths that he needs to contradict in his book. The myths that he is talking about is first this idea that race is real. He says race is not real. This is what we talked about last time, where he says race is the, I always forget the quote and I mess it up. Race is the child of racism, not the father, right? So that race is a concept that derives from racism, but is not an actual physical, scientific, distinguishable thing. It's just what we have decided culturally is this distinguishing factor. The number 2 myth that he's thinking about is that you can advance with hard work. Okay, let's pick up right here. He is talking about this thing called the dream over and over again. You notice how he capitalizes the word dream and he just calls it the dream. He's referring to the American dream, which is an idea that you can be, no matter what your circumstances are, that you are born in America, you can work really hard and you can get an education and you can, meet the right people and get the right job and you can become successful in whichever way you deem successful. Like you could become rich, you could become famous, you could become happy, like you can think of success in a lot of different ways. But the American dream is it doesn't really matter where you started from, everyone could end up in that place with hard work, right? What does Ta-Nehisi Coates have to say about that idea in this essay? I know it's been a couple days now since we read it. Yeah, Katie.
Like you kind of said, dream is basically for white people. Like if you're white, then yeah, this is how it works. But if you start out African American, the dream is not meant for you. It's not offered to you. You cannot have it.
Yeah, distinctions, I should say, based on racism, right? So when he's thinking about this idea, he's like, well, not everybody gets access to that dream. And in fact, the only reason that some people get access to it is because other people are subjugated. So he has this idea of economics that's like kind of like limited economics, scarcity economics, which means there's a certain amount of resources that we have access to. And if one group of people take that amount of resources, that means that this group of people has less resources, right? And so it's like this idea that if resources are limited, then one group of people is going to benefit a lot by minimizing the amount of resources that somebody else can get. Because if through, for example, racism, you can cut this down and say, well, let's do this much instead, then this group suddenly increases their wealth. So he's got that kind of idea, and that doesn't necessarily mean that this is the way that the world works. This is just what Ta-Nehisi Coates is like talking about in terms of how he sees the world. Yeah.
I'm wondering, I kind of connected it with how a lot of religions say that you're predetermined, be glorified.
Yeah, like the Puritans did, right?
Yeah, I thought of it kind of like that, and he was saying that one race,
Yeah. Yeah, and so he's talking about this idea then that, yeah, there's this advancement that someone can start here and they can move on up. I can start middle class and I can work really hard and I can become upper class, right? But then he says, but there has to be this like kind of platform for starting at, and this platform is like a base of labor that has to stay there in order for those people to keep climbing. And there always has to be this kind of like labor base. So I'm going to show you what he says about this. This is on page 11. He says, I have seen that dream all my life. It is perfect houses with nice lawns. It's just right at the top of the page. It's Memorial Day cookouts, block associations, and driveways. The dream is tree houses and the Cub Scouts. The dream smells like peppermint but tastes like strawberry shortcake. And for so long, I have wanted to escape into the dream, to fold my country over my head like a blanket. But this has never been an option because the dream rests on our backs, the bedding made from our bodies. All right, tell me about the way, let's analyze, to use our word of the day, let's analyze that last sentence. But this has never been an option because the dream rests on our backs, the bedding made from our bodies. Why does he word it that way? Yeah, Josie.
I think kind of what you were saying too about like the whole resources thing, right? Like, because of them, like, it's almost he's saying like you're taking advantage of like, you know, like,
Yeah.
like, because we don't have these opportunities or whatever, you guys get to like, prosper.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. And it's like you get to see yourself at the top of the hierarchy too, because there are people who don't have that dream. And you have to have people who don't have the dream in order to be able to define what the dream is. How he's looking at it. Yeah, go ahead.
I think he kind of looks like this, because it kind of, he kind of uses imagery like kind of way.
Yes.
That like helps you picture it. Like you can imagine like this bed and it's only being held up and people can only like come in and sleep or enjoy it because people under are holding it up and making it stable. Yeah. So he uses that to show like no one sees us. We're holding this up and no one sees us. And you just get to enjoy your dream while we just are like helping it exist.
Okay, yes. So it's like this way that the base, you're looking at the bed as a structure and the base of the bed is like invisible. It's maybe like covered up and not really, we're not actually seeing it. So if there are people who like, I don't know, I feel like COVID has turned things around a little bit where like a laboring class has become a little bit more visible, where we realize, oh shoot, we depend on people who do this kind of work, and people who sit at their computers and do work, maybe they're not so valuable. Before that though, I think it was super easy to forget about those people, right? Maybe not for you guys, you're teenagers, so you're working those jobs, a lot of you. You're working at the Arctic Circle or whatever, but like for me, I like can go to Arctic Circle and I don't have to think about the person who is making my food. So it's this idea that like I get to enjoy luxuries because somebody else is gonna do all the dirty work. I get to like have my nice lawns and my perfect house because I've taken so many of those resources, limited resources from somebody else who doesn't get that perfect lawn, but I don't have to think about that. So it's this invisibility idea. Yeah, Gracie.
Yeah, I think he's like trying to bring to light that the dream had to come from somewhere. Like it wasn't just there because America was created. It had to come off the backs of the people that like what whites deemed them to be. Like,
Yeah.
okay, we're gonna make you guys be what we build the dream off of, so that we don't have to do so that we can just live the dream.
Yeah, and I like the way that you said that, like creating that us versus them sort of attitude so that you can build off of it. Yeah. Right.
The dream is also one of the
Yes, I think that's so important here. Yeah, it's not just not available, it is like a dangerous, it's like he has a problem with it being available to anyone when not everyone can participate in it because he's being kept down by it. Okay, I'm saying he, which I think complicates the issue. 1 second, and we'll get back to that also.
Well, I was thinking a lot about the same like Gracie and anywhere, but I was just thinking that he's kind of alluding to the history of slavery. You know, he's saying something, the dream started out when there were slaves. You know, it started out even before there were slaves. It's something that's so fundamentally centered in that it doesn't just go away because there isn't slavery anymore. He's saying like the people are still racist, basically. He's like, they're not going to change their ideals. They're not going to let me in when this idea from so long ago is still here.
And he's also saying that the economic system hasn't changed in any way where we could be successful without some kind of system of slavery or oppression.
He's still saying like we're still doing the grunt work when they're all up there and they're towers and they won't let us climb up. Right.
Right. And I think that like that allusion to slavery is actually direct right here.
Yeah.
Why do you think it says rest on our backs specifically, not shoulders? Usually we talk about Atlas holding the world on his shoulders. No, we're talking about our backs.
Over, it's harder.
Okay, good. So it's somebody like bent over, right? And then why bedding? What's bedding made out of? Cotton, yeah, he's specifically alluding to slavery here, that you can pull over the dream like a blanket over your head and you can find comfort in the labor that somebody else is doing without ever having to think about that particular labor. Okay, so what do you think of that idea? Just like, that's what we got Coates' idea. What do you think of that idea?
Just like one thing that I think of, I think it's so important to like do some of those types of jobs in your life. Just so you do understand people, like once you move on, like, you know, I'm a maid, so I go to like, I talk to lots of different people, and like we've gone to Mexico 3 times, and I say that I'm a maid, and people give me the weirdest looks, because they're like, if you're in America, why, you know?
Because there's
they
this
seem
fantasy that
shocked.
everyone has the American
Yeah, they
dream.
seem shocked that I'm a maid. I'm like, yeah, my parents have done well, but I still need to understand how they got there. Because my mom was a maid from 8 to professional maid from 8 on till college.
Yeah.
So like, there's a process, and you don't have to skip it, because if you don't do the hard work in the beginning, you're not going to know how to do it when it comes time to really put in the effort to get there.
Yeah, okay, so this, you're agreeing with him that this like idea that people are
Yes, but
delineated.
I also don't think that they should be making themselves victims and saying, "Oh, I can't do this for this reason." So I feel like
Okay.
he's like holding them. He's like saying, "We can't do this because they're holding us back." But I'm like, you can fight against that. You should fight against it and do what you need to do.
Okay, yeah.
That makes me really sad.
What does he say about the fight against part in his book so far? In the book that you've read?
Kaylee?
Yes.
Like, and I remember that I'd expected to fail.
Yes.
Like, he's like,
She asked me about hope, and I knew then that I had failed. If the news anchor is saying like, well, what's your hope for the future? He's like, oh, I haven't explained myself then, because obviously there is no hope. That's sort of where he's coming from. So yeah, super pessimistic.
So how are you supposed to build on that?
So could that be self-defeating? Yeah. Is that a way of just like accepting circumstances then? Yeah. Julie.
And I think like when you're setting yourself up, you're like, I understand that like he feels oppressed, and they definitely were. But I think like they were saying he should fight for it as well. Because at least for me personally, like when I'm like, I know I'm gonna do horrible at this thing, like I automatically like the bar just becomes lower and lower and lower. I think going back to the bed analogy and on the back instead of the shoulders, it kind of alludes back to his talking about his body and how like they need to protect it, and when it's on your back, like you're gonna collapse and there's like no chance of.
Yeah. So oh, Josie. Yeah.
I was just gonna bring up to like my own opinion.
Good. Yes.
Yeah,
Go for it.
I could definitely understand like the whole like you still need to fight, and I definitely think that's true, but I could also understand maybe why he has given up hope, because I would definitely agree that sometimes no matter how hard you work, it's not going to be and like depending on where you lived or where you grew up, poverty could be a big thing. So you won't have all the opportunities someone with money can. You won't be able to get in the same schools. Maybe you will have medical reasons. You'll be in debt for your whole life. So it will kind of hold you back. And I think along with that too, like the whole hope thing, because this fight has been going on for so long, and like even recently, I don't know if everyone's heard, but like what's been happening in the Davis County school system with racism.
Do you guys know about Davis County school system? Okay, let me catch him up. So there was a Justice Department investigation of Davis County School District. And they found a history that's been going on for 5 years. They found a history of really blatant racism that's just been repetitive. So like both on the part of like fellow students, but also like admin having a history of punishing kids of color more harshly than the white kids, or of dismissing like racially based attacks and just like sort of assuming the best about the person who committed the hate crime, or like graffiti, or like all of these sort of like really just crazy, really disgusting like acts of racism that existed in Davis County. Well, just so you know, our school, not our school, but our district is also under investigation. Our district and Alpine School District are both have been part of this investigation. Ours just isn't done yet. But I don't know, you've been a student in this school district. I'm not really expecting that much of a difference between us and Davis. we'll see, but yeah, anyway,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Definitely, like, I could see why, like, the loss of labor happening, even like small things, like, I know today, like, I'll have people continuously call like indigenous people Indians, people who might not be like as racist, I still think like, like people still just don't understand quite, or again, there's like very blatant racist things that happen to this day, and it's been going on since the start of America. So
Yeah.
I could definitely understand why someone might feel like
Yeah, do you think that there could be any use in pointing out your pessimism? Because I agree about like the dangers of pessimism and the dangers of losing hope. But is there some sort of argumentative use to continually say to people, no, you're not understanding this, like right now, the way I see it, there is no hope, okay?
I think I definitely agree that like and that but at the same time I don't think that's to blame
Mm.
if he has that attitude or really believe that he can achieve something that would help for everything.
Okay,
Because they felt
okay, got it, Kaylee?
was successful. The author of this, he was successful. He was in a position that he like this is the most like the way to say it, like overcame the prejudice against him or had to
Yeah.
go away in order to be successful. So the point that he's making here isn't that no one can do it, it's that it's so hard to do it. They're starting from such a much lower level than the people who are already in power. So like the problem with the American dream, as I see it, and this is purely my opinion, but the problem with the American dream is that it assumes that everyone starts at the same level and really can work their way up. Start really high, you don't have to work as much. People start really low and have to work a lot. So I think what he's saying here is that the amount of work he has had to do to get to the level he's at is so much less than it would be for someone who's more white. That's the problem. The problem here isn't that no one can do it. The problem is that the process to do it is so different based on something so arbitrary.
Oh, I like the way you
And
said that,
so-
yeah.
That's why he's got this like pessimism. It's not because he doesn't think anyone can do it. It's because what they have to do to get it is so like overwhelming and ridiculous and
Yeah, I want to show you, to back up Kaylee's argument about what he's saying here, the part about schools, I think, can be powerful, just because it's a way that we haven't really thought about things. So go to page 32. And in that first, well, I guess it's just that one big paragraph, kind of closer to the top, it says the Black people in these films, he's talking about civil rights films. And by the way, he points out a Freedom Writers film that I am about to show my 11th grade honors class. So he's kind of talking about the school system as it is now as well. The Black people in these films seem to love the worst things in life, love the dogs that rent their children apart, the tear gas that clotted their lungs, the fire hoses that tore off their clothes and tumbled them into the streets. They seem to love the men who raped them, the women who cursed them, love the children who spat on them, the terrorists that bombed them. Why are they showing this to us? Why were only our heroes nonviolent? I think that's such a powerful statement to what Kayla's talking about. It's not that he's saying that nonviolence is not an admirable way to protest. I've heard him talk about it, and he actually thinks that Martin Luther King's way of protesting was like the exact right thing, exactly right for the moment. He is a big believer in nonviolent protest as an ideology. But his problem here is that why were only our heroes nonviolent? He's pointing out that there's two different sort of expectations for the different groups. And for them, the expectations were so much higher than the expectations for what he would say is non-Black people, but he would not necessarily qualify as a race. Yeah. Okay, awesome.
This is kind of hard to explain, but I just think it is important to say like what you are pessimistic on. But that's just because you have a starting point. It's like
Yes.
therapy. You have to grow from that. So it's important to acknowledge what's hard in order to figure out what you need to do to get better and move on.
Yeah, and I think that's the point he kind of starts at, but then gets stuck at. So if you look
Yeah.
at page 12, and he's talking about being stuck too, and being stuck is part of his argument. He says, I tell you now that the question of how one should live within a Black body, within a country lost in the dream, is the question of my life. And the pursuit of this question, I have found, ultimately answers itself. And if you look at the bottom of that page, it says, the question is unanswerable. I can't say that word, which is not to say futile. The greatest reward of this constant interrogation, of confrontation with the brutality of my country, is that it has freed me from ghosts and girded me against the sheer terror of disembodiment. So he's saying that starting with my pessimism and questioning all of these sort of aspects of my life through this lens of racism has allowed me to at least kind of like recognize my condition. And he stays with the pessimism. That's what this book has been criticized for the most, is like the just deep pessimism and hopelessness of it. But for him, asking the question itself is like a step forward. It's like a recognition. If we all can recognize this thing, maybe we can move forward. And I'll get to you just in a second, Austin. An interview I was listening to him that came out a couple months ago. Did I already tell you about this interview? No, that's a different one. It was a radio interview. He said, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I actually have a lot of hope for the future. And he used that word hope. And he said the reason was because he felt like there would never be a situation where non-Black people were advocating for Black rights the way that Black people were. And when he looked and he saw all of the Black Lives Matter protests and saw how multiracial they were, he was like really hopeful about the future. So he didn't necessarily stay here, but I think Elsa's right about like recognizing that pessimism for stuff. Austin?
I feel like it's good to talk about where pessimistic about to a certain extent, because if you talk about it too much, then you just sound annoying. Yeah. And then you just sound like you're complaining and it's nothing good.
Mhm.
But you need to talk about it enough so that it's kind of a call to action to those that are listening to you.
Yes.
Because by saying that there's not hope, people are really stubborn. And so we want to be like, well, we'll show you. And
Okay,
be able
good.
to, like, prove a point.
And I think that transitions to what he thinks this next myth is, which is this idea of America as innocent. And I think that's why he stays in this really bleak, pessimistic tone throughout, is because he is trying to combat this myth that America, maybe has made some mistakes. I think he says maybe has had some errors in its past, but ultimately has done good for the world. He's like, this is what I want to fight. Yeah, Kaylee.
He feels like trying to people gives America the right to say that they're not that bad. Like
Yes.
the way he talks about it, he's like, it seems like he's saying, if I go out there and be like, well, we can just do this and then everything will be okay. If he does that, then he's saying that America is overcoming their issues when he doesn't think they are, and he thinks if he gives them an excuse to get out of it, they will.
Yeah, and he thinks that it's a deeper problem than just like a few people being racist. And I think that's part of his issue here and part of what makes him so controversial. So I don't know if I'll get parent emails this year. I might get parent emails this year because this is a super controversial book because of this particular idea. He says on page 6, here we go, controversy. He says, Americans deify democracy in a way that allows for a dim awareness that they have from time to time stood in defiance of their God. But democracy is a forgiving God, and America's heresies, torture, theft, enslavement, are so common among individuals and nations that none can declare themselves immune. In fact, Americans, in a real sense, have never betrayed their God. So basically, he is saying that Americans have always been democracies, but that the idea of democracy can be flawed and racist, and that's the controversial part. It says when Abraham Lincoln declared in 1863 that the Battle of Gettysburg must ensure that government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth, he was not merely being aspirational. At the onset of the Civil War, the United States of America had one of the highest rates of suffrage in the world, meaning that it all depended on how you defined people. So if the Constitution defines people as, white landowning men, then the rate of suffrage is the highest that it has ever been, the rate of people able to vote. The question is not whether Lincoln truly meant government of the people, but what our country has throughout its history taken the political term people to actually mean. In 1863, it did not mean your mother, he's talking to his son here, or your grandmother, and it did not mean you and me. Thus, America's problem is not its betrayal of government of the people, but the means by which the people acquired their names. So what makes this book so controversial is that not that he's saying that like so Barack Obama would say, we can become a more perfect union. Our sort of institutions are so good that we can work to make them even more perfect and we can live in unity and achieve this American dream, right? And Ta-Nehisi Coates is saying from the beginning, the country is founded on this idea of racism and distinctions between groups. That's the idea. So again, this is Ta-Nehisi Coates. That's the idea that everyone is really scared of this year with talks about racism, is this idea that that there just is pessimism sort of built into the system. Yeah.
Well, I feel like he's putting words into Abraham Lincoln's mouth,
Mm-hmm.
because I see where he's coming from. He's taking the situation of that time and saying that's what he meant. But Abraham Lincoln was so progressive and so no, we should be equal.
Yeah.
But that's not what he was going for. He was trying to make people be inclusive for everyone. He wasn't like every other white man in that time.
Yeah.
You
Okay.
know?
Good.
And he was like discounting that. I'm like, Abraham Lincoln's an amazing man. Like Martin Luther King did his I Have a Dream speech right in front of that monument.
Great. Good point. Yeah. Good point. Keely?
I believe it's not necessarily
The idea.
it's like example to show how what our country has changed a lot.
Yeah.
It's changing for the better, but what he's saying here is the fact that we founded this country on the idea that people with such a big group does not set us up for a good future. I think that's
Yes. Yes. And he's also saying that we maybe have progressed socially, but we haven't progressed politically enough to become equal. And so he looks at the progression of not racist ideas, maybe even anti-racist ideas, and then he looks at the progression of racist ideas and he sees the way racist ideas have changed over time, but he doesn't see them disappearing because he still sees people making these big distinctions between racial groups, which is a different argument. But yeah,
I'm
just
just a little confused. So
yes.
Is he trying to argue that like democracy, that like idea in general is racist, or the way that America is doing democracy?
I think he's saying, that's a good question. I think he's saying here that Americans deify democracy by saying that their system of government, democracy, is like from God. It's like a divine sort of idea. And because of that, it allows them to say, it allows for a dim awareness that they have from time to time stood in defiance of their God. So they look to democracy as this perfect system, but they haven't always practiced it perfectly. But he's saying that democracy in the way that our country has made it work has always been imperfect from the very beginning. So maybe not democracy as an idealistic system, but democracy in the way it's always existed in the United States. Yeah.
I think what you might be saying also is that maybe well, they believe that democracy is given from God, but like reading through what he says, it seems like it's transitioned from given by God to democracy itself being their God.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great way of saying that. Yeah. So he looks at like America seeing themselves as exceptional, but then the reason they can see themselves as exceptional is because they say we kind of worship at the feet of democracy. And it's always good and it's good at its heart, but it makes way for things to fall apart. I mean, Thoreau said the same thing. Thoreau is like democracy, majority rules is really dangerous because the majority is not always morally right. Yeah.
No, I get that. This comes back to like, it's important to point out pessimism, because nothing ever is 100% completely right. So you gotta point out like, no, this is wrong, so we should change it, but never point those things out. It's never gonna get better.
Yeah, and that's why I thought it was such a good transition, is because it's like point out that America's not innocent so that you have something else to build upon. Yeah. Yeah, Kayla?
I think is the call to action. Because it's all this big setup for a call to action. It's not.
What is the action he wants his son to take? What was it? Be sad. Be sad. He's responding to his son's sadness at seeing the news about police violence. Like, how does he think that this book, this letter, might help his son? Josie?
I think, again, I definitely don't think this is too much of a thing, but I think it's more of a like, yeah, you're gonna be sad and you should be sad and that's right. You can't. I think it's more of a like, it's okay to be upset and you should be upset and you shouldn't calm down about this. And I think that's
Yeah.
kind of what's focused. It's not like a, oh, it'll be okay, right? I think he literally says, it won't be okay. Or like in an interview, he says,
Yes.
I think that's his focus.
Absolutely, and I think that's why the pessimism is actually a really powerful rhetorical tool, is because if he did give him a call to action, people a call to action, says, and now you can go out and you can protest and we can make this better, it kind of like minimizes how dark and sad the experience is. Maybe. Claire?
Well, I think they're coming from like, right, this is a kid like us, like how is it like, I think, like you said, the very strong approach to life, especially for a kid. Because if you put this idea in their brain, like, this is flawed, this is bad, let's do this, like, not necessarily because they don't want action. Still, like, kids have a lot of hope. And so they're not gonna just wanna be like, oh, I guess like the rest of my life is gonna be horrible. They're gonna be like, well, I want to change, don't be super. And I think if you gave them like the hope, they're like, oh, there is some good, less fun, but maybe I need to make it. Like, I need to make some change.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Ta-Nehisi Coates elsewhere has talked about how black parents have to give their kids the talk about police officers and how to encounter police officers. And it never, that talk, the way that he talks about it, never includes like, and don't worry, like eventually things will get better and it'll be okay. Because they're trying to prepare their kids for dangerous situations and making sure you stay safe, you know? And because of that, by preparing them for this dangerous situation and saying, hey, it's dangerous out there, that might compel the kid to want to change some things, you know, without him having to actually say it. Yeah.
I think at some points it feels more like a guide where it's like something that you give, like, because I think he's a parent and he wants his kid to do as best he can. But it's kind of like, hey, this kind of sucks, but you're gonna have to kind of learn to kind of figure out how to at least get through it. And it's like, it might get better, but it might not. So I'm kind of making sure that you know, like, it could, but like for now, you need to make sure that you just don't like get screwed over because it's different. It's like it feels more like a guide on how like you to safely go through this, even though it's kind of a tough world.
Yeah, how to stay safe. And he keeps saying how to keep your body safe too. Yeah, I agree. Avrin.
To me, in my opinion, I feel like it's advocating, like, he's kind of educating his son and saying that this country has always had and continues to have deeply rooted and ingrained systematic oppression for people, and that the system will most likely be against them most of the time. Yeah, keep kind of preparing.
And kind of know that so that maybe your expectations aren't as high.
Maybe.
Ooh, yeah, maybe. Yeah, Zoe.
And I think also going off like educating him. When I was a kid, everything, like nothing mattered to me, like money or like friendships, nothing kind of mattered. I was just kind of going as a kid, and I think he's educating him at such a young age, like this is gonna happen to you, and like and not everything is just like happiness and sparkles here. America, like from the get-go, kind of in like a racist country, and so I think he's just trying to educate not only his son but like anyone else that like even if we might think that everything is good, it's kind of passion burning.
Yeah, when he like the sort of inspiration behind the book, he says, is watching his son react to the verdicts on I think it's the Garner case, right, where the police officers were just reinstated, and seeing that disappointment in this kid. And so to go with what Brennan said too, it seems like he's wanting to prepare him for that disappointment, maybe so that the disappointment is not so strong. Yeah.
I think
Yes, that's where I was going to go next.
it doesn't say that this you can protect your mind. It doesn't say you protect your soul. It doesn't say you protect your husband because it seems very clear that he thinks you can't do that. He's like, it's not okay. You're going to be upset and sad and this is terrible and there's nothing you can do about that at this point. Like he makes it very clear, like you do all these things to protect your body, but that's not the only thing that you protect.
Yeah, I think that is part of what he means by the protecting your body part. I think there's even something else too. So go back to that page 12 that we were looking at before. He says that asking the question, so asking about why this oppression exists and why he exists, why he's discriminated against or so on. He says that it's to protect him against the sheer terror of disembodiment. So disembodiment we could think of as death, being disembodied, like you are removed from your body. Yes, but I think we can think about disembodiment in a different way. What is he talking about there with all the insistence on body and how he doesn't want to be disembodied, doesn't want to lose his body? Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. He doesn't want to lose his identity. So what would it mean that racism could force somebody to lose their identity through the body? Yeah, Kelly. You're all right.
I have a lot of things to say. So I think disembodiment in the racism, bringing it all back to slavery, was like this idea that you're a slave, you're no longer a person. This idea that you're a Black person, that's all you are. Like they just take away everything that makes them their identity, everything that makes them like by this racist idea that limits what they can.
Okay, I think that's the majority of it. Yeah, Jana.
I think going off of when they're slaves too, it's like they like own their body kind of. They didn't have it just like I how do you say
Yes, and I think that if we look at this idea of racism, like fathering this idea of race, then it's an ideology that has enslaved a body and decided what that body can be. So I think the disembodiment, he talks in here a lot about like Black is beautiful, Black bodies are beautiful, Black hair is beautiful, and so on. And it kind of throws people off because they're like, hey, I thought he said there's no such thing as race, But what he's talking about there is that like individual bodies, like the physical body are beautiful, but a concept like race turns people into an ideology. It turns people into a symbol so that you can become disembodied from what that body actually is. Does that make sense? A little bit to some? Okay, yeah.
Well, this also makes me think of what Martin Luther King said. I'm just well, I'm right now. But he said, I dream of the day that my fortune can be based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin.
Right.
I just love that so much because in here he's saying we're being judged by how we live. It's like everyone else was saying, this is the box that they put us in. But you need to protect that and let that not be the defining thing of you. It is still part of you, but you can use that and the rest of you to make yourself better and like.
Yes. So he doesn't want to say that we're all just the content of our character, Ta-Nehisi Coates. He also wants to say we're our bodies too.
Yeah, you're both. You can't
yes
erase one part and only
exactly
the other.
Exactly. And he's furious about the idea that his body has been sort of like taken away from him to become an idea rather than an actual body.
And also kind of like I feel like a lot of the time in like media, there's like here and there's the exceptional one Black kid. He's like, no, there shouldn't be just an exception, like it should you shouldn't be defined based on how we look.
Yeah,
allowed to.
I think that would be his response to somebody also who was like, what are you talking about, Ta-Nehisi Coates? You're super rich. Like what about Oprah? And that would be his idea systematically. We're not all Oprahs.
Yeah.
Okay, we are only going to do one of these and then you're gonna hang on to this. We'll get back to voting. Okay. At the top of this sheet, I've written 3 of Ta-Nehisi Coates's arguments that he has, but I've written them in really simplistic terms. And I want us to practice making these more complicated or more specific. Right now, they're narrow, but they're vague, and I'm hoping that we can make them narrow, but also specific. So it says, Coates argues that Black bodies are always in danger. What could you add to that argument, or reword it in a way that makes it more specific? So I want you to try and just do the first one. And that is it for today. So one thing you could do is you could ask, why? Why are they always in danger? Or you could say, who puts them in danger? What makes them in danger? What makes them be in danger? I feel weird drinking a soda while talking about such a serious subject. Okay, and that wraps up our civil rights unit. So next week, you'll be doing a timed rhetorical analysis in class. So we're going to practice what it would be like on the actual AP test.
I don't think I'm ready to start.
It will be on a civil rights topic. That's part of the reason I do this unit, is because so many of the AP samples are. And then we'll talk about it afterwards. And of course you can do rewrites on it. So don't be too scared.
I will be to